Hi everybody and welcome to Ravenous Butterflies. Here I am in my conservatory and it's really good to see you and thank you so much for joining me. This is a different view, so you're getting to see little aspects of my house. One day you might even see all of it. So today I'm going to delve into a couple of books. This is one of my favourites from when I was I think I got given this from one of my teachers when I was about 10 at little junior school, and in her name is even in the book. It's really old. And I've kind of put notations and things in it. So it's by an author, it's by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Please forgive me, French speakers who I'm for my terrible French accent. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about him. He has quite an interesting background. He was born in 1900, he died in 1944, and he was from a very kind of quite posh, eminent family. I think they can trace their family tree back by about 700 years. He was a writer, a poet, an aviator, and a journalist, and he had a fantastically weird experience. He was trying to break the speed record with another chap, and they were flying over the desert in Egypt, and he was fine. They were just going along, and then suddenly they had a massive crash, and they crashed in the desert. And all they had with them, I'm going to tell you what they had with them because it really wasn't very much at all. They had some grapes, 2 oranges, a madeleine, which is a little lovely cake, some coffee in a flask, half a pint of white wine, some alcohol, wipes and things like that from their medicine cabinet. They had enough water apparently to last them a maximum of 2 days between them, and they became delirious. And they got discovered after the 4th day of being lost in the desert. It was somewhere off the Nile, in a place called, what was it called? It was called near Wadi Nutrun Delta, which is somewhere in Egypt. Anyway, they got discovered by a Bedouin tribesman, and he had a camel, and he chucked them over the back of the camel, and he rescued them. And when Antoine de Saint-Exupéry came back, he wrote, well, there were 2 books that he wrote about that time because he had lots of hallucinations, when they were dehydrated and they didn't have enough water. And he wrote 2 books, and one of them was The Little Prince. And the other one, which I do have as well, actually, is Wind, Sand and Stars. He also wrote Night Flight as well. He was a bit of a philanderer. He was married, but he sort of went off and had other women as well. Very heavy drinker. And actually, he died in 1944 because he was flying. He did a lot of reconnaissance flights in World War II and things. And he was flying off the Mediterranean. Some people thought it was near Corsica, but actually it was just off Marseille in south of France. And he flew and his plane went missing. And nobody knew. He just went missing and they just presumed dead. And sometime in the late 90s, his identity bracelet, or a identity bracelet with his name on it and his wife's name, and I think their marriage date was found at the bottom of the sea, just outside of Marseille, just in the sea, in the sort of harbour. And then part of his plane was found as well. So they assume that he actually crashed off the south coast of France. Anyway, enough of that nonsense. I'm now going to read to you from my book, and I said it's got all my notations in it from when I was little. So when I opened it today, I've got about 4 copies of this, and I had this one very close by, and I opened it up, and I was just like, oh my goodness, there's all my little notes on everything. It was just so sweet. It took me right back to, 48 years ago when I first read it. Okay, this is the bit about love, and it's the bit about the rose, and I've actually picked a couple of little roses from the garden, especially because I thought, well, red rose signifies love, and the first rose that starts off that he finds has just got a very small, simple little rose bud head to it. So here we go. I soon learned to know this flower better. On the little prince's planet, the flowers had always been very simple. They had only 1 ring of petals. They took up no room at all. They were a trouble to nobody. One morning they would appear in the grass, and by night they would have faded away peacefully. But one day, from a seed blown from nowhere knew where, a new flower had come up, and the little prince had watched very closely over this small sprout, which was not like any other small sprouts on his planet. It might, you see, have been a new kind of baobab, because if we remember, he'd found those baobab trees before, so who knows? But the shrub soon stopped growing and began to get ready to produce a flower. The little prince, who was present at the first appearance of a huge bud, felt at once that some sort of miraculous apparition must emerge from it. There's the huge bud. But the flower wasn't satisfied to complete the preparations for her beauty in the shelter of her green chamber. She dressed herself slowly. She adjusted her petals one by one. She didn't wish to go out into the world all rumpled like the field poppies. It was only in the full radiance of her beauty that she wished to appear. Oh yes, she was a coquettish creature. And her mysterious adornment lasted for days and days. It's like somebody getting ready for the Met Ball or something. And after working, then one morning, exactly at sunrise, she suddenly showed herself. And after working with all this painstaking precision, she yawned and said, "Oh, I'm scarcely awake. I beg that you will excuse me. My petals are still all disarranged." But the little prince couldn't restrain his admiration. "Oh, how beautiful you are." "I'm not," the flower responded sweetly, "and I was born at the same moment as the sun," meaning she'd obviously been around for a long time. The little prince could only guess easily enough that she was not any too modest, but how moving and exciting she was. "I think it's time for breakfast," she added in an instant later. "If you would have the kindness to think of my needs." And the little prince, completely abashed, went to look for a sprinkling can of fresh water. So he tended the flower. So too she began very quickly to torment him with her vanity, which was, if the truth be known, a little difficult to deal with. One day, for instance, she was speaking of her 4 thorns. She said to the little prince, "Let the tigers come with their claws." "But there are no tigers on my planet," the little prince objected. "And anyway, tigers don't eat weeds." "I'm not a weed," the flower replied sweetly. "Oh, please excuse me. And I'm not afraid of tigers," she went on, "but I have a horror of drafts. I suppose you wouldn't have a screen for me." "A horror of drafts? That's bad luck for a plant," remarked the little prince, and added to himself, "This flower is a very complex creature." Well, there's a lot to be said in that, isn't there? Complex, just like, well, a lot of people actually, not just women and men. We're complex creatures. "At night, I want you to put me under a glass globe. It's very cold where you live, in the place where I came from." But she interrupted herself at that point. She had come in from a seed. She'd come in the form of a seed, and she couldn't have ever known any other worlds. Embarrassed over having let herself be caught on the verge of such a naive untruth, she coughed 2 or 3 times in order to put the little prince in the wrong. "The screen?" "I was just going to look for it when you spoke to me." Then she forced the cough a little more so that he should suffer from remorse just the same. So the little prince, in spite of all the goodwill that was inseparable from his love, had soon come to doubt her. He had taken seriously words which were without importance and had made him very unhappy. "I ought not to have listened to her," he confided to me one day. "One never ought to listen to the flowers. One should simply look at them and breathe in their fragrance." That's that delicious flower, actually, a lovely rose. "Mine perfumed all my planet, but I didn't know how to take pleasure in all her grace. This tale of claws, which disturbed me so much, should only have filled my heart with tenderness and pity." And he continued his confidences. "The fact is that I didn't know how to understand anything. I ought to have judged by deeds and not by words. She cast her fragrance and her radiance over me. I ought never to have run away from her. I ought to have guessed all the affection that lay behind her poor little stratagems. Flowers are so inconsistent, but I was just too young to know how to love her." Gorgeous rose. And yeah, that's just, it's kind of a bit of a parable, isn't it? It's quite wise, really, because in youth, when we're young and we first have our first love and that kind of thing, we do not know often how to really respond. Or I sometimes think back to relationships I had before I got married, and I think, gosh, I wish I'd had more confidence, or I wish I'd understood the complexities of that, or wondered where that person was coming from. But I didn't. I was just too young, probably, to even know what love was, and too young to understand. And I think there is the the failing of many a relationship. So, and now I'm going to move on. So we're going to go from a single rose to this lovely single rose to a whole garden. And as you've probably been, those of you who've been following me, I do love my garden. In fact, my son is outside in the garden at the moment, and I can see him as he's digging up the side of my flower beds, just neatening off my edges and things, which is really lovely, and making the flower beds bigger so we can plant even more flowers. So I do love a garden, and I will take you around it when it's not raining, because he is actually working outside in the pouring rain. So there we go. So I'm going to take you on another little journey of my childhood, and I'm going to take you to this book, which is Oscar Wilde. And I had a lovely, lovely illustrated book of his stories when I was young. And when I lived in Sri Lanka, I used to go to bed, and if I was very lucky, maybe once a week, maybe on a Saturday evening or Friday evening, my dad would come in with the book and we would go through it together, and I'd look at the pictures and he would read it to me. And my favourite story of all was The Selfish Giant. And I know from some of the comments in the feed when I put out a call for reading which books to read today, The Selfish Giant was a great favourite of many of yours. And I have to say, I'm going to try not to cry when I read it, but I have to say that there's many a time that I've sat down to read the story to my own children, and I don't know whether it's because I was reminiscing and I could remember my dad reading it to me, and it was a very sort of fond memory that I had, because we didn't do that kind of thing very often in my family. And it just meant so much to me, and because it's such a beautifully written story, and and I suppose I have a love of gardens now. So, and my children used to kind of run quite free in the garden when they were growing up in our family house. So I have those lovely memories of this kind of magical garden, and yeah. So this is one of their favourites as well. So I'm going to read you a bit of it, but I'm first going to tell you a little bit about Oscar Wilde. So Oscar Wilde was Irish. He was born in Ireland, and he went to Trinity College, and then he went to Magdalen College in Oxford, and he was a real aesthete, I suppose. He was into asceticism, and he was a bit of a dandy, and he sort of loved polite society, and he dressed in quite sort of, interesting, sort of quite bohemian clothes, and he was kind of considered quite a sort of luminary and bon vivant within the kind of social circles at the time. He was born in 1854, he died in 1900, and I wrongly suggested that he was hung when I was talking about him yesterday, but actually he wasn't. He was put into prison for, he was caught in a hotel room, but it was all a bit of a setup really, and he was put in prison, and he was with a man. He was put in prison, and then he escaped to France after a couple of years in prison. He escaped to France, to Paris, and he died in a hotel room there. He was married, and he did have 2 children, and in fact he was in love with Bram Stoker's wife when he was young, but then Bram Stoker married her, so he couldn't marry her, and he was quite upset about that. So I'm going to just read to you from The Selfish Giant, which I hope you'll enjoy. That there's an illustration of, you can see the size of this gruesome giant. There he is, scaring everybody. So here we go. Every afternoon as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl. And in the autumn they bore rich fruit. I want to grow some peach trees actually, and some apricot trees. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. "How happy we are here," they cried. One day the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend the Cornish ogre, and he had stayed with him for 7 whole years. After the 7 years were over, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited. I think 7 years of conversation is quite a lot. And he determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. "My own garden is my garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall all around it. Look, you can see my son behind me, over there. He's doing the gardening at the moment. "So I will build a high wall around it and put up a notice board." And he put up a notice board and it said, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and hard and full of stones, and they didn't like it. They used to wander around the high wall when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. "How happy we were there," they said to each other. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were blossoms and little birds, and only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds didn't care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, and when it saw the notice board, it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they cried, "so we will live here all year round." I'm just going to have a sip of water. The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden and blew the chimney pots down. "This is a delightful spot," he said. "We must ask the hail on a visit." So the hail came. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates, and then he ran round and around the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in grey, and his breath was like ice. I cannot understand why the spring is so late coming," said the selfish giant, as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold white garden. "I hope there'll be a change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. Look, there's the picture of the house. Autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but not to the giant's garden. She gave absolutely none. "He's too selfish," she said. So it was always winter here. And the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced around through the trees. One morning the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he'd heard a bird singing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful thing in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement window. "I believe the spring has come home at last," said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw the most beautiful sight. Through a little hole in the wall the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see there was a little child, and the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. You see, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to bring some love and soul and joy back into the lives of people, does it? Just to give a bit of kindness and sharing and just, can wake up the garden like that. It was a lovely scene, but only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he couldn't reach up into the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around it and crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could, but the boy was just too tiny. and the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish I've been," he said. "Now I know why the spring wouldn't come here. I'll put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I'll knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground for ever and ever." And he was really, really sorry about what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy didn't run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he didn't see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him into the top of the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his 2 arms and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant wasn't wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring. "It's your garden now, little children," said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden that they had ever seen. And all day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye. "But where's your little companion?" he said. "The boy I put up into the tree." The giant loved him best of all because he'd kissed him. "We don't know," answered the children. "He's gone away." "You must tell him to be sure and come here tomorrow," said the giant. But the children said they didn't know where he lived and had never seen him before, and the giant felt very, very sad. Every afternoon when school was over, the children came and played with the giant, but the little boy whom the giant loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for his first little friend and spoke of him. "How I'd like to see him," he used to say. And years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He couldn't play about anymore, so he sat in the huge armchair and watched the children at their games and admired his garden. "I have many beautiful flowers," he said, "but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all." I feel like that about my children, actually, in my garden. One winter morning he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He didn't hate this winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep, and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly he rubbed his eyes in wonder and looked, and certainly it was a marvellous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were all golden and silver, and fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy that he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant, in great joy, and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and came near to the child, and when he came quite close his face grew red with anger, and he said, "Who hath dared to wound thee?" For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on his little feet. "Who hath dared wound thee?" cried the giant. "Tell me that I may take my big sword and slay him." "Nay," answered the child, "but these are the wounds of love." "Who art thou?" said the child, and a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt down before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant and said to him, "You let me play in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossom. Oh, that's a sad one. I hope it's not left you too sad. But that's just such a lovely story, and it really relates to me because I used to read it a lot, and my dad used to read it, and I read it to my children. And I think that the whole idea about sharing your beauty and garden and space and knowledge and love with other people is so important. I mean, obviously the giant had spent so much time sort of cooped up in his castle all on his own. He'd forgotten what it was like to be amongst other people, and he just didn't like the idea of other people trespassing on in his garden and in his space. But actually, at the end of the day, if we shut ourselves in an ivory tower or up in our castle or hide ourselves away, we're missing out on the joy of sharing and kindness and giving, aren't we? And I think that, it's really important to, well, and also the loneliness factor. I mean, he was on his own in that cold, miserable tower when he had all those lovely little children playing in the garden, and the garden was so happy and was giving him lots and lots of joy because of all the flowers that were blooming and the trees and the fruits and everything and the blossoms. And I think it's very important. There's a bit of a lesson there, I think. There's a lesson about sharing. There's a lesson about giving. And also about a little bit about nature and the planet. Because I really do believe that nature is not just something that just is stuck in the ground. I mean, we've come to learn that trees talk to each other through their roots, and so do fungi and mushrooms and all sorts of things. We just think I truly think that we only think that the animal kingdom have brains and things, but now we're beginning to realise that actually is in the plant kingdom as well. And I'm sure, I mean, having moved into this house with the garden, when my mother was ill and dying, this garden was ill and dying. And since I've been here and it's come back, it's sort of sprung back to life, and now it's a growing, living thing. And it looks happy and it's abundant and it's flourishing. And I really do believe that. I really do believe that plants can sense, a bit like animals can sense. They have like a sixth sense. I'm sure of it. When we need them to be there for us, they're there. When we need nourishing and nurturing, and we nurture and nourish our gardens and our plants, indoor plants are the same. They can sense and pick up on all those sort of invisible vibrations, I'm sure, and light and things like that. And they actually benefit from us being happy and tending to them and loving them. They can probably feel the sort of love vibrations coming from us. And I think that's why being in a garden is actually a really, really amazing thing, because it can give you so much of a sense of well-being and health benefits and mental health benefits. It's very important. So I hope you enjoy your garden, and I wonder what that makes you feel. How does that story make you feel? Does it take you back to when you were younger? Have you never heard it before? And if you haven't heard it before, how did it make you feel? And have you ever thought about perhaps the things that it raised in the stories? Well, even the one from The Little Prince about the lovely rose, and how she was so kind of vain and selfish that he thought perhaps that it was him that didn't know how to love her. But actually, she was the one that was the demanding one, and she was the one that was very sort of narcissistic, really, and just wanted all of his attention, and wanted him to sort of jump around her and think how beautiful she was, and how she was just this kind of walking, work of art. So yeah. So let me just see, is there anything that anybody said here that they would like me to... Oh, hello. Hi from Indiana, Terry, and hi Mercy from Africa and Seattle there. We've got Catherine in Seattle. We've got everybody from all over the world. It's really exciting. It's really great. It's lovely to see you all. So have any of you read any of those Oscar Wilde stories yourselves? Or have you read The Little Prince? Is there something there which has reminded you about something that you would like to share? Because I'd love to know. And if there's anybody out there with any questions, please do ask me, because I'm here now for another few minutes, and I can... Hi, Shana from New Zealand. Good to see you. And yes, Kathleen, it's poignant more than sad, I suppose. Maybe it was really sad when I was young. It made me cry. It made me feel sad. And maybe there are times in life where you do get affected by things a lot more than obviously when you're young, because you've lived through life experiences and maybe you've toughened up a little bit. I can remember my mother-in-law saying to me, as soon as you have a baby, you're going to cry a lot more tears. And I think that was absolutely true for a while. And I've got 3 children, and I certainly did. But yeah, we've got the Netherlands here as well. Hi, Nego. Is it Nego Elefanti? Hello, nice to see you from the Netherlands. Would anybody like to ask me any questions before I go? I've literally got a couple of minutes to on here now, and it'd be really interesting to answer any of your questions about anything that I've spoken about this evening. And I really enjoy doing these live feeds, and it's lovely that they're so interactive. Patricia from Montana, there we go, lovely. And yeah, I mean, Jackie says it's sad, but it is very beautiful. I think she's referring to the selfish giant. It is sad and it is beautiful. And you know, it's sad because he waited all that time until he was really old and about to die before he, you know, those last few years of his life, before he allowed those children to come in and to share his beautiful garden. Hi, Pam from Georgia. Nice to see you. And yeah, really good to see you. And Bobby from Florida. Nice one. Happy Florida. Well, happy Florida. I bet it's very hot and humid there at the moment. And oh yes, Marianne's asking me, can I give you a title? Yeah, Marianne, it was from the Oscar Wilde Stories for Children, and it's The Selfish Giant. And The Selfish Giant is a beautiful story. I mean, I've just got this little paperback here, and it's just got a few of the stories in here. It's got The Young King, and it's got The Remarkable Rocket, it's got The Happy Prince, it's got The Nightingale and the Rose, which is another one of my absolute favourites. You can see my son, where is he, going around there, walking around the garden planting. Yeah, The Happy Prince, and then it's got The Selfish Giant. And The Nightingale and the Rose is a really sad one. Oh, hi Jackie, you're feeling inspired, you say, from Maryland. I'm glad you're feeling inspired. I'm so pleased to have inspired you and that the stories have inspired you. You know, I started writing some short stories and some poetry once I started to get really heavily involved with Ravenous Butterflies, because the more that I was researching poetry and quotes and rereading passages from books and things, the more that I started writing my own stuff. So I'm hoping that by seeing me reading and by actually by being part of these live events and perhaps listening to them again, because obviously I've read the whole story of The Selfish Giant, you can listen to the whole thing again. It will maybe make you get your own pen and paper out and start writing down little stories for yourself, for your grandchildren, for your children, for your friends, for your partners, lovers, whatever it is, because it's school children. It's a really lovely thing to do. So Oscar Wilde, Stories of, yeah, there we go. We've got it in the feed there. Thank you for your warmth and wisdom. I love the resonance with your posts. So thank you, Felicity. That's very kind of you. Well, I'm not sure about wisdom. I sort of try, I suppose, but I think that in life, you know, it's good to read as much as you can and learn as much as you can and spread the word. So please do get out there. Please do get writing. Please do start writing down your own thoughts and just basically being as creative as possible. Because I can tell you from experience, it really is fantastic source of inspiration and it can, for others, and it can really help you. It certainly helped me through my kind of recovery from my emotional disasters, divorce, bereavement, things like that. So it's been very, very helpful indeed. So anyway, what have we got here? I'm going to be clocking off in a minute. Marianne says, thanks so much. Absolute pleasure, Marianne. And I just wanted to send you all my love. And please do keep sharing and spreading the words. Linda says, thanks. Thank you, Linda, for joining us. And lovely to see you. And spread the word amongst your friends. Keep Ravenous Butterflies flying strong. And yeah, let's meet again hopefully sometime next week. Let me know what you'd like me to read or talk about next time, and I'll definitely be here for all of you then. So have a lovely, lovely evening. The weather here is pretty grey and miserable at the moment, as you can see. I'm hoping it's going to improve, and then I can take you out into my garden and give you a little tour, and you can see what I'm up to and what we've been planting, what we've been doing here as it grows. Norman says thank you, so uplifting, and Anne says thank you for your wisdom. Thank you so much, Anne. That's really kind. So I'm going to go now, and I'm going to send you lots and lots of love from England, from here, from my little village, from my little garden and my life. And Ita says thanks, Lisa. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody so much for coming and for joining me. It really makes it worthwhile, and it makes me feel like I'm not alone, and I hope that you've all enjoyed being here and being part of my evening. So lots and lots and lots of love, and I'll see you all soon. And yeah, keep spreading the word and keep going. Jackie says a garden tour, that would be lovely. I think it would be lovely too, but I'm not going to be doing it in the rain. I'm going to wait for the weather to be nice, and then I'll take you out and about, and I'll take you on a little tour, and I'll let you know all about it. Okay, lots of love. I might even give you some tips. Although, because everybody is from all over the world, things might be a little bit different in your zones, your different zones. But we'll try, and you'll probably see some very familiar things that you've probably got in your gardens or your balconies or your flower pots too. All right, lots of love, everybody. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Lots and lots of love. Bye-bye. Enjoy the books. Enjoy re-listening. Bye bye.